The day began like any other at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. Early morning sunlight painted the Chugach Mountains in soft hues of pink and gold. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere was calm. Travelers sipped coffee, their conversations a low, pleasant hum. Families heading out for summer vacations stood in line, children watching the planes with wide-eyed wonder. The usual rhythm of a major transportation hub was in full swing, a predictable and comforting dance of arrivals and departures. For the airport staff, it was business as usual. Ground crews were preparing aircraft for their next flights. Air traffic controllers monitored their screens, their voices calm and steady. There was no hint of the extraordinary event that was about to unfold. The morning promised nothing more than routine operations under a clear Alaskan sky. A small tour group gathered near a large window, pointing out the majestic peaks that framed the airfield. Flight announcements echoed gently through the concourse, listing destinations like Seattle, Denver, and Fairbanks. The calm before a storm no one saw coming. This quiet, unremarkable morning would soon become a day that no one at the airport would ever forget. The tranquility was shattered in an instant. A deafening roar, unlike any normal aircraft sound, ripped through the air. Heads snapped up across the terminal. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The sound was followed by a sickening crunch of metal on metal. People instinctively looked towards the windows, their faces etched with confusion and sudden alarm. Outside on the tarmac, the source of the chaos became terrifyingly clear. A large, unmarked cargo plane had veered off its taxiway. It collided with a series of ground support vehicles, scattering them like toys. Sparks flew as its wings scraped against the asphalt. The aircraft finally shuddered to a halt at a dangerous angle, its landing gear visibly damaged. One of its engines was smoking, sending thick, black plumes into the pristine Alaskan air. The initial shock quickly gave way to a wave of panic. The sense of safety had evaporated completely. The immediate aftermath of the incident was a scene of controlled chaos. Airport emergency crews responded with incredible speed. Fire trucks, their sirens wailing, raced across the airfield towards the smoking aircraft. Ground staff scrambled to secure the area. Inside the terminal, confusion reigned. Passengers were shouting questions at airline staff, who had little information to give. Security officers began moving through the crowds, trying to create space and prevent a stampede. The lack of clear information was fueling the fear. Air traffic controllers immediately halted all ground movement. The skies above Anchorage, usually busy with air traffic, fell silent. The airport director and key security personnel converged in the control tower, their faces grim. They needed to understand what had happened, who was on that plane, and what threat it might still pose. The situation was far from a simple accident. In the critical first hour, the official response was characterized by a frustrating lack of information. While emergency crews worked diligently on the tarmac, a wall of silence descended from the authorities. This information vacuum created a breeding ground for rumor and speculation among the thousands of stranded passengers. Whispers of terrorism, a hijacking, or a military incident spread like wildfire. Behind the scenes, a multi-agency response was kicking into gear. The unmarked nature of the aircraft immediately raised red flags at the highest levels. Communications were happening on secure channels, with officials trying to identify the plane's origin, its flight plan, and its cargo. The priority was to assess the threat before making any public statements. The lack of transparency, while intended to prevent panic, was having the opposite effect. The message, unspoken but clear, was that this was a situation far beyond a typical aviation accident. We managed to speak with several people who were there, and their accounts paint a vivid picture of the fear and confusion. "I was standing in line for coffee," said Sarah Jenkins, a tourist from Ohio. "First, there was this awful noise, a grinding sound. Then the whole building seemed to shake. Everyone started screaming. I grabbed my son, and we just ran. An airport employee, a baggage handler, was on the tarmac when the incident occurred. It came out of nowhere," he told us, his voice still shaking. "It wasn't on the taxiway it was supposed to be on. It was moving too fast. I had to dive behind a container to avoid getting hit by debris. A pilot for a major airline whose flight was next in line for takeoff shared her experience. We were holding short of the runway when we saw it. Captain Eva Rostova explained. It wasn't responding to air traffic control. It was a rogue aircraft. Hours into the standoff, the nature of the threat began to shift. Specialized vehicles, typically associated with hazmat and CBRN response teams, began to arrive at the scene. Personnel in full-body protective suits, carrying Geiger counters, cautiously approached the downed aircraft. This development sent a new wave of fear through everyone watching. The problem wasn't just the crash, it was what the plane might be carrying. Unverified intelligence suggested it could be transporting undeclared radiological materials. The damage to the aircraft meant a potential breach of its cargo hold. A leak of radioactive material would be a catastrophic event. The emergency response had now escalated from a crash investigation to a potential radiological containment operation. Announcing a potential radiation leak without confirmation would cause mass hysteria. The teams in protective gear moved slowly, methodically sweeping the area around the plane. Every second was critical. The stakes had been raised to an unimaginable level. With the confirmation of a potential radiological threat, the decision was made. Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport was to be shut down completely. An official announcement finally blared through the terminal's speakers, its tone stark and serious. For your safety, the airport is now closed. All flights are canceled. No one is permitted to leave the terminal building. The words hung in the air, confirming that the situation was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The shutdown was immediate and absolute. All inbound flights were diverted to Fairbanks or back to their points of origin. On the ground, the scene inside the terminal transformed from one of anxious waiting to one of indefinite confinement. Passengers were now effectively quarantined. Security personnel, some now wearing face masks, blocked all exits. The feeling of being trapped was now a stark reality. For the thousands of stranded travelers, the news was a devastating blow. The airport, a place of transit, had become a massive, involuntary holding pen. Late in the evening, nearly 12 hours after the incident began, the federal government finally broke its silence. The Department of Homeland Security issued a formal statement, read live on national television by a spokesperson. This morning, an unregistered aircraft made an unauthorized landing at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, resulting in a ground incident, the spokesperson began. Emergency crews responded immediately. Out of an abundance of caution, due to the nature of the aircraft and its unknown cargo, the airport has been closed. The statement confirmed the presence of a potential hazardous material threat. Federal and state hazmat teams are on site to assess the situation. At this time, we have no confirmation of a release of any hazardous materials. The safety of the public and the passengers at the airport is our top priority. The decision to shut down the airport was made to ensure that the assessment can be conducted safely and thoroughly. We are working to provide food, water, and shelter to those affected by the closure. The government acknowledged the difficulty of the situation for those trapped at the airport. We ask for your continued patience as our teams work to resolve this situation as quickly and safely as possible. The government was admitting this was an unprecedented event, and they were still struggling to get a handle on it. As the sun sets on this long and terrifying day, the future for Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport remains deeply uncertain. The immediate next step is the painstaking work of the hazmat teams. They will continue their slow, methodical assessment of the mysterious cargo plane. Their findings will determine everything that happens next. If they find no radiological leak and can safely secure the cargo, the process of reopening the airport can begin. This would still take days, as the aircraft would need to be removed and the tarmac inspected for damage. However, if a leak is confirmed, the consequences will be severe. A full-scale decontamination effort would be required, a process that could take weeks or even months. This would be a logistical and economic nightmare for Alaska, a state that depends so heavily on air travel. The airport would remain closed, and the economic ripple effects would be felt across the state. The health of the emergency responders and anyone potentially exposed would become a primary, long-term concern. For the thousands of passengers still quarantined in the terminal, the ordeal is far from over. They will likely be moved to more suitable temporary shelters once it is deemed safe to transport them. Beyond the logistics, there is the psychological toll. The ultimate question remains: what was that plane, and what was it doing in Anchorage?